Howdy, it's me here, Aaron, with the tiny mic. Today, I really want to talk about Fuji and things that they have to update on this XH2S. This camera is really close to being incredible. I love it. I genuinely do. But there's just a few things that it's a firmware upgrade away from being, for me, one of the perfect cameras. So the first one I think is not only the easiest update, but it should most definitely also be the most sensible update. And that is being able to map the front dials, or the front and the rear dial, to be what we want it to be. So either ISO, aperture, or shutter speed. Right now it can only be shutter speed or aperture. In an ecosystem with aperture being on the lenses for the most part, it makes zero sense that this is not an option, because usually we're changing it on the lens in the first place. I'm mostly adapting vintage lenses actually, which you can only change the aperture on the lens itself. But even then, again, any of the Fuji lenses that are native or not third party and aren't the cheap XC lens, you can change it on the lens. So it makes zero sense. So that's number one, and that has to change. The next thing that, again, should be fairly easy, it's not necessarily going to be as easy as that, because prior, I think Fuji always had the ability to change the dials to whatever you wanted. The next thing would be global settings. So then custom settings aren't affecting things like shutter speed, aperture, ISO, white balance. So pretty much those four things, from what I can think of off the top of my head, are the things that I would want to be consistent across the board if I changed custom settings. I think that's the general consensus on that as well. There are exceptions, and it'd be fine if you could change it to where, like, sometimes you would want the global settings to be set to that custom setting, but I would much rather it be a global thing rather than set to the custom setting. So right now it's an issue because let's say I get my exposure and everything, but then I realize, oh, I really want this to be slow-mo. Well, I'll change my settings, my custom settings to my slow-mo setting, and now my white balance is messed up, my shutter speed, my ISO, everything is totally off on this. And so it really makes no sense that that's not an option, and that has to change, in my opinion. The next one should be probably the easiest thing, because this is actually something that was in every single Fujifilm camera and is now not in the Fuji cameras, which doesn't make sense. But when you hit my menu, it should go, or when you hit the menu, it should go straight to my menu. This is, set up intentionally because it's the most frequently used menu settings. And so it really should be changed in the next firmware update, where, and maybe give us the ability to change this, because if someone doesn't want this, that's fine. I'm all for the most customizability. How do you say that word? Customizability. That's the one, I think. I'm all for as much customization as you can get. And so I would much rather it be like all the previous Fuji cameras were, though, where you hit menu, it goes straight to my menu. That hasn't changed, in my opinion, on the next firmware update. The next one is one that I've been asking for since the X-T4 came out, and that is the Lens IS and IBIS should be independent of each other. I want to be able to control one or the other and use one or the other. I don't like how Lens IS and IBIS fight each other, especially if I'm using my Metabone speed booster. It was better on the X-T4. Now with the XH2S, there's something wrong with the firmware on the Metabones, I'm guessing, and it really causes some weird effects. And so I would love to be able to turn the Lens IS off or the IBIS off, but have one or the other on. And they should be independent of each other. They're not right now, and it to me is a big issue. And so yeah, hopefully that will be updated soon. Timecode, from my knowledge, I have not tested this too strongly, but I have tested it a little bit. Timecode is not in the metadata, which is a big deal. But not only that, timecode is not able to be jammed from like either audio source or I don't know how else it would be done. But timecode is right now only written to HDMI, which is super weird. I would love to be able to like jam timecode. If this camera can keep timecode, which is great, it's already a step up on most mirrorless cameras, then it should be able to jam that timecode so then it can sync with every other device that I have. And so I'm starting to get into the Tentacle Sync ecosystem. And right now it's an issue because I have to use a Tentacle Sync E when realistically I should be able to just jam a master into each camera and have that camera keep its own timecode, because the camera has the ability to do that. The software is just not able to accept the timecode from a Sync-E or any other any other system that has timecode. And so that would be amazing if that gets added. Currently, I'm just gonna have to use the Sync-E into the audio source, which works in itself. But man, this camera could really have a leg up. Like, that would be such a leg up in this mirrorless hybrid system if it could accept timecode and keep its own timecode. Because as far as I know, no other hybrid mirrorless camera is doing that. Only the cinema lines are doing that. And so, Fuji, get on it. That would be awesome. The next one's pretty big for, I think, a lot of people. For me, it's not a huge deal because I do use a lot of vintage lenses, and so I don't really necessarily notice this. If I'm not using a vintage lens, I'm using a speed booster for the most part. And so it's not that big of a deal for me, but it's the sharpening in the camera. And so I think the other reason people are noticing it more in this XH2S is F-Log2 seems to have more sharpness. And I don't know if that's from the noise in the camera or what, or just less or more processing on that end. But I would love the ability to turn more sharpness down and reduce it as much as possible. I know without it being raw, there's going to be some form of post-processing, but it really would be amazing if we could completely remove sharpening, or as much as we possibly could, because I think most people would much rather add that in post. And so to me, it doesn't look like the worst digital sharpening. I think it feels more like it's just a sharp sensor. And it also, one thing people don't really comment on, I'm gonna lean forward for this. I think one thing people don't really comment on is this camera does not have an OLPF or whatever it is, a polarizing filter. And so the cameras that do have that are going to be less sharp. And so typically I think people say you add like a Gaussian blur with like a 0.1 something. And so to emulate having that filter, you would add that in post. Or you can add, a diffusion filter. I don't prefer to put filters in front of my lens if I don't have to, other than, an ND of some sort. Yeah, I think it would be nice if we could turn down more sharpening. I think it's just that 6K sensor is ridiculously sharp, and there's no infrared pollution filter on the camera like there is on a lot of the other cameras. And so that right there is immediately cutting down some of the sharpness. And so really, to me, it's not that big of a deal because you can reduce that sharpness in post beautifully, in my opinion. And it's not something that can't be really taken away, but it is what it is. Some people hate it, and I would not mind being able to reduce it even more. I think one of the last topics for me would be the HDMI output. And I didn't run into this issue until very recently. So one thing that I have loved to use is the 6K open gate. The 6K open gate is really just a phenomenal thing with this camera. I recently worked on a project where they pretty much exclusively wanted vertical content, but there's so many benefits to shooting horizontal even still. And if I wasn't able to shoot in 6K and with the open gate, then I probably would have just shot it vertically. But when you're shooting horizontal and you're delivering vertically, you can actually use this longer sensor and then move that frame around. And so there was several instances where I was able to, frame two people and jump between the two for this deliverable that I was doing. And so having that extra vertical space is, in my opinion, huge at a 6K resolution, because we're delivering this at 1080p. We're losing 0 resolution there. Even with cropping in, I think the vertical resolution is almost 4K. If you're delivering a 1920 or a 1080 by 1920 edit or a crop. And so it's really a huge benefit to have that. And I'm rambling at this point, but the one big issue that I'm running into is I can't output a lower resolution to my HDMI. And so previously you could say, I want to record in 4K, but I want my HDMI to be outputting 1080p. Right now it's just automatic. The camera or monitor is going to interpret it however it wants to, and that becomes an issue when a camera can't interpret 6K. I have 2 different monitors that don't accept it at all. My small HD and my Fieldworld LUT 6, which is probably one of my favorite monitors right now. It is a very sharp image. It looks good. It's inspiring to see such a good image, and it's my brightest monitor. But I can't use that in OpenGate. My Ninja works with it. And so I am getting a Blackmagic Video Assist, so do stay tuned, because once I get that, we're gonna do some tests. We're gonna see how sharp this sensor actually is without any post-processing versus how sharp it is with, the normal H.265 codec or ProRes or whatever. But all that to say, I really wish there was an ability to output whatever resolution I want on the HDMI and record the card to whatever I want. And so currently, don't love that. But that would be huge if that could be updated. So those are currently the big things. After using this camera very often for the past 2 or so months, those are the huge things to me that definitely need to be updated in the firmware. It's not going to push me from this camera system, because this camera system already has a lot of things that other camera systems don't have. I don't want to have to just live with some of those things. And so if those things were updated, I would be even more happy with this camera. I already love it, but I do think this camera is lacking in some areas, and mostly because it's lacking this firmware update. That would be killer and really make it quite possibly the perfect camera in its budget for video creators. That's about it for me for what I'd love to see updated. I would like to hear what you found, maybe some things that you'd like to see updated. Go ahead and drop that in the comments below the like button. Do subscribe, I will have some content coming out for F-Log, color grading it. Also, I really plan, like I mentioned earlier, to compare B-Raw to F-Log. And so subscribe so you don't miss that, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Drop the tiny mic.